What if the cup of coffee sitting in your kitchen right now could be one of the most powerful tools you have for managing your blood sugar after 60? Not a supplement, not a prescription, just coffee, the same drink millions of seniors reach for every single morning, but drunk at the right time, in the right way, with one or two small adjustments that most people have never been told about. I have spent years working with patients over 60 who are managing prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and what I am going to share with you today has genuinely changed the health trajectory of many of them. Not because I gave them something new, but because I showed them how to use something they already had in a way that actually works with their biology instead of quietly working against it. The numbers around blood sugar and diabetes after 60 are more serious than most people realize. What concerns me most in my daily practice is not only the patients who already have a diagnosis, but the large group of people living right on the edge. They have that unexplained fatigue that hits around 2 in the afternoon. They have that persistent thirst that does not go away. They have fasting glucose readings their doctor called borderline, but did not spend much time explaining. And many of them are drinking coffee every single day in ways that are quietly making every one of those problems worse, without any idea that a few simple changes could turn that same habit into something that genuinely helps. Stay with me through this entire video because I am going to show you exactly how to drink your coffee to support healthy blood sugar, when to drink it, what to avoid mixing with it, and why the biology behind all of this makes complete sense once you understand it. But first, let me tell you something about coffee itself that most people have never heard explained properly, because understanding it is what makes everything else in this video make sense. Coffee is not simply caffeine dissolved in hot water. A single cup of properly brewed coffee contains hundreds of bioactive compounds, and 2 of them have been studied specifically in the context of blood sugar regulation, with results that genuinely surprised the research community when they first emerged. Those compounds are chlorogenic acid and trigonelline. Think of them as intelligent traffic controllers stationed at the entrance to your digestive system. When they are present and functioning properly, they slow down the rate at which sugar from food enters your bloodstream. Instead of a sudden flood of glucose arriving all at once and demanding an emergency insulin response from your pancreas, you get a controlled, gradual flow that the system can manage without becoming overwhelmed. A landmark study published in Diabetes Care, drawing on data from more than 1 million people followed over time, found that regular coffee consumption was associated with a significant and meaningful reduction in the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. This was not a small effect buried in the statistical noise. It was consistent, dose-dependent, and replicated across multiple independent research groups. A major review from one of Europe's most respected medical institutions examined 30 separate studies covering more than 1 million participants and confirmed that both regular and decaffeinated coffee consumption were associated with roughly a 30% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. 30%. From a drink that costs pennies per cup and is already part of most seniors' daily routines. But here is the critical point that those headlines almost never include. These benefits depend entirely on how you drink your coffee. The wrong coffee drunk at the wrong time in the wrong way does not just fail to help. It actively works against your blood sugar. And this is exactly what I see happening in my practice more often than anything else when a patient tells me they drink coffee every day and still cannot understand why their glucose numbers will not improve. Let me tell you about a patient I will call Raymond, 71 years old, retired, someone who had been drinking coffee his entire adult life and was genuinely proud of it. When he came to see me, his fasting glucose was elevated and his 3-month blood sugar average was above the target range. He was frustrated because he felt he was doing everything right. He walked regularly, he was careful about what he ate, and he drank his coffee every day. When I asked him to walk me through his coffee routine in detail, the picture changed completely. Raymond woke up every morning and, before eating anything, before drinking water, drank a large, strong black coffee on an empty stomach. He had a second coffee at 3 in the afternoon with a couple of biscuits, and he sometimes had a third in the early evening because he found it helped him wind down. 3 mistakes, each one working directly against his blood sugar, and none of them visible until I asked the specific questions. Mistake number 1 is drinking coffee on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, and this is by far the most common and most damaging error I see in patients over 60. Here is what is happening biologically. When you wake up after a full night of fasting, your body is already in a state of elevated cortisol, your primary stress hormone, which rises naturally in the early morning hours as a survival mechanism designed to give you energy to start your day. Cortisol does this by signaling your liver to release stored glucose into your bloodstream. That is normal and expected. The problem is that caffeine amplifies this effect directly. It stimulates the adrenal glands to release additional adrenaline, which signals the liver to release even more glucose. And you have not eaten a single thing yet. Your blood sugar rises sometimes by 20 to 40 points before any food has crossed your lips. Research published in the British Journal of Nutrition confirmed this effect specifically. Drinking black coffee on an empty stomach after overnight fasting can significantly elevate blood glucose levels in the morning, an effect that compounds the natural cortisol-driven glucose release that was already happening. For a senior whose glucose regulation is already less efficient than it was decades ago, starting every morning this way is like putting your foot on the gas pedal before you have finished warming up the engine. Mistake number 2 is adding anything sweet to your coffee, whether that is sugar of any kind, honey, flavored creamer, or even many artificial sweeteners. This one gets more nuanced than people expect. The sugar addition is straightforward. A spoonful of any sweetener added to coffee creates an immediate glucose spike that directly cancels out the benefits of the chlorogenic acid you just consumed. You are essentially using the fire extinguisher and the lighter at the same time, but the artificial sweetener situation is more complicated and more concerning than most people realize. Many seniors switched to artificial sweeteners years ago under the assumption that 0 calories meant 0 blood sugar impact. Recent research has complicated that assumption considerably. Evidence published in peer-reviewed nutrition journals suggests that certain common artificial sweeteners, including some of the most widely used ones, may alter the composition and function of the gut microbiome, the community of bacteria living in your intestines that plays a direct and significant role in how your body processes glucose. Changes to that bacterial community in unfavorable directions can impair glucose metabolism over time in ways that are not reflected in an immediate blood sugar reading, but that show up in the longer-term numbers. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found specifically that coffee without any additives was associated with a meaningful reduction in diabetes risk per additional cup, but that when coffee was consumed with sugar, that protective effect was substantially diminished. Plain coffee is what the research shows to be protective. Sweetened coffee is a different drink with a meaningfully different metabolic profile. Mistake number 3 is drinking coffee in the late afternoon or evening, and for seniors who are managing blood sugar, this timing error may be doing as much damage as anything else on this list. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours in most adults, meaning that half of the caffeine from a 3 o'clock coffee is still circulating in your system at 8 or 9 in the evening. For many older adults whose caffeine metabolism has slowed somewhat with age, that half-life is even longer. Elevated caffeine in the evening keeps cortisol higher than it should be at the time of day when it needs to be falling. It interferes with the deep, slow-wave sleep that your body depends on for a critical aspect of glucose regulation. Research is consistently clear that poor sleep quality drives worse blood sugar control the following day, and that chronically disrupted sleep is an independent risk factor for the progression of prediabetes toward type 2 diabetes. Poor sleep creates elevated glucose. Elevated glucose disrupts sleep further. It is a cycle that evening coffee can quietly feed without anyone connecting the two. When Raymond and I sat down and restructured his coffee routine around these 3 principles, the change in his numbers within 2 months was striking. His fasting glucose dropped by more than 20 points. His 3-month blood sugar average moved from above the target range back into a much healthier zone. He had not changed his medication. He had not made dramatic dietary changes. He had not joined a gym. He had changed when and how he drank a cup of coffee he was already drinking every single day. If this is giving you something useful, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I have more content like this coming, and the patients who have benefited most from what I share are the ones who keep coming back for the next piece rather than treating any one video as a complete picture. Now let me tell you exactly how coffee should be drunk to get the maximum blood sugar benefit from the compounds it contains, because knowing the mistakes is only half the picture. Understanding the right approach is where the real change happens. The first ideal moment for coffee is not the moment you wake up. When you first wake up, do not reach for the coffee maker. Reach for a glass of water first. Let 30 to 60 minutes pass. Then before your coffee, eat something that contains protein, scrambled eggs, a boiled egg, plain Greek yogurt, a small portion of cheese, any quality protein source. Only then, after the protein, drink your plain unsweetened coffee. The reason protein comes first is specific and worth understanding. Protein buffers the cortisol-stimulating effect of caffeine. When you have eaten protein before drinking coffee, the amino acids from that protein give your liver something more useful to work with than releasing a glucose surge, and the cortisol spike from caffeine is meaningfully blunted. Research published in endocrinology journals examining the interaction between protein intake and glucose response found that consuming protein before caffeine and carbohydrates reduces the post-meal glucose excursion, the sharp rise in blood sugar after eating, compared with having caffeine before or without protein. For a senior whose pancreas is working harder than it should to manage glucose after every meal, that reduction in glucose excursion is genuinely meaningful. If you want to compound this effect further, add half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon to your coffee. Not cinnamon syrup, not cinnamon-flavored creamer, pure ground cinnamon powder. Cinnamon contains natural compounds that partially mimic insulin's action at the cellular level, helping cells absorb glucose more efficiently. Multiple studies and research reviews have found that regular cinnamon consumption contributes to modest but real reductions in fasting glucose over time. It is not a medication, and it works through different pathways than your medication does, but as part of a consistent daily routine, it adds a meaningful layer of support. It also makes plain black coffee considerably more enjoyable to drink for people who are still adjusting to removing sugar. The second ideal moment for coffee is 20 to 30 minutes before your main meal of the day. This is the timing detail that most people have never encountered, and it is one of the most practically powerful pieces of information in this entire video. When you drink a small cup of plain black coffee before a meal that will contain carbohydrates, the chlorogenic acid and trigonelline in that coffee reach your digestive system before the food does. They slow the absorption of sugar from the meal that follows, reducing the height and sharpness of the glucose peak that meal would otherwise produce. Research examining coffee components specifically in the context of post-meal glucose responses found that chlorogenic acid and trigonelline significantly reduced glucose and insulin concentrations in the first 15 to 30 minutes after carbohydrate consumption compared with controls. This effect is real, measurable in clinical settings, and available to you every time you sit down to your main meal for no additional cost whatsoever. The practical application is simple. Before lunch or whichever meal is typically your largest, brew a small cup of plain black coffee and drink it 20 to 30 minutes before you start eating. No sugar, no creamer, no sweetener of any kind. The smaller the cup, the better for this purpose, since you are not trying to maximize caffeine intake, but rather to deliver the chlorogenic acid where it can do the most good before the glucose from your meal arrives. The third ideal moment for coffee, and the one that surprises most people, is within 30 minutes after physical activity. If you walk regularly, which I strongly encourage for anyone over 60 managing blood sugar, your muscles in the 30 to 60 minutes following that walk are in a uniquely receptive state. They have just burned through some of their stored glucose, and they are actively pulling more glucose out of the bloodstream to replenish their stores, operating through a pathway that does not depend on insulin at all. Caffeine consumed in this window appears to enhance this muscle glucose uptake effect, helping your muscles act even more efficiently as a sponge for blood sugar during the period when they are already most receptive to absorbing it. It is a narrow metabolic window that most people either do not know about or do not use strategically, and it represents one of the most efficient times of day to drink your coffee from a blood sugar perspective. Let me share a second patient story because the real-world picture matters as much as the biochemistry. I will call her Dorothy, 68 years old, a retired school administrator, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 3 years before she came to see me, and struggling to get her numbers under control despite being conscientious about her medication and her diet. Her coffee routine was immediately recognizable. Sweetened coffee with milk before eating anything in the morning. Another sweetened coffee with a small sweet snack in the afternoon. Her glucose numbers reflected exactly what I would predict from that pattern. We made targeted changes. In the morning, she waited 45 minutes after waking, drank water, ate a boiled egg, then had her plain coffee with a half teaspoon of cinnamon. Before lunch, a small plain black coffee 20 minutes ahead of her meal. 3 afternoons a week, she took a 25-minute walk and had a plain coffee shortly after. The sweetened afternoon coffee and the accompanying snack were replaced with a handful of nuts and water. 6 weeks later, her 3-month blood sugar average had dropped to the best level since her diagnosis. Her fasting glucose was in the healthy range for the first time in years. She told me she had more energy in the mornings than she could remember. I had not changed her medication. I had changed her relationship with a cup of coffee she was already drinking every single day. Now, I want to warn you about the things that destroy the benefits we have been discussing, because understanding what works is only useful if you also understand what cancels it. I call these the silent enemies of protective coffee. The first enemy is any form of sweetener, refined sugar, brown sugar, honey, agave, and the same applies to most artificial options, as we discussed. Coffee without anything added is the version the research consistently associates with blood sugar protection. Coffee with sweeteners of any kind is a different drink with a different metabolic signature. The second enemy is instant coffee products sold in sachets, the flavored varieties, the 2-in-1 and 3-in-1 products, the pre-mixed creamers. These products often contain hidden sugars, hydrogenated fats, and additives that undermine the nutritional quality of the coffee itself and can produce the glucose spike you were trying to avoid. Plain, freshly brewed ground coffee, ideally from quality Arabica beans, is what contains the chlorogenic acid and trigonelline in meaningful amounts. Processed instant products are a different thing entirely. The third enemy is pairing your coffee with ultra-processed foods. White bread, filled cookies, commercial pastries, industrial cakes. When you drink even a perfect cup of plain black coffee alongside foods like these, the glucose spike from the refined carbohydrates overwhelms whatever moderating effect the chlorogenic acid might have provided. Coffee is not a rescue tool for a poor food choice. It works as a blood sugar ally when it is part of a dietary pattern that is not constantly creating the spikes it is trying to moderate. Let me leave you with what I call the supporting triad, because coffee alone is a piece of a larger picture, and the patients who see the most meaningful and lasting improvement are the ones who understand how the pieces work together. The first element is smart coffee. What we have covered today: the right timing, the right preparation, no sweeteners, the pre-meal cup, the post-exercise cup, the cinnamon addition, the protein before the first cup of the day. The second element is consistent movement. 30 minutes of moderate walking 3 to 5 times a week is enough to make a genuinely significant difference in insulin sensitivity. When muscles are regularly called upon to work, they become better at pulling glucose out of the bloodstream through insulin-independent pathways. The combination of regular walking and strategically timed coffee creates a synergy where each amplifies the effect of the other. The third element is protein at every main meal. After 60, protein needs actually increase at the same time that many seniors are inadvertently reducing protein intake. Protein is the macronutrient with the least direct impact on blood sugar and the one that best protects the muscle mass that is one of your body's most important tools for glucose regulation. Eggs, fish, chicken, legumes, plain yogurt, and cheese are all excellent practical sources. Including a meaningful portion at each main meal alongside the smart coffee habits we have discussed gives your blood sugar regulation system what it genuinely needs to function well. I need to be honest about one important thing before we close. Everything here is based on solid scientific evidence and real patient experience, but these are lifestyle strategies that complement medical care, not replace it. If you have a diagnosed condition and take medication, do not change your dosage or stop medication on the basis of anything in this video. Bring this information to your next appointment and discuss it with your doctor. Let them monitor your numbers as you implement these changes. The goal is for your medical care and your daily habits to work together. Your body is not your enemy. When blood sugar rises persistently, when fatigue becomes chronic, those are signals requesting different inputs. And very often what your body is asking for is not another pill. It is a small change in a daily habit you were already going to carry out anyway. Start tomorrow morning, drink water first, wait 30 to 45 minutes, eat something with protein, then drink your plain coffee with half a teaspoon of cinnamon. And before your lunch, drink a small plain cup 20 minutes ahead of your meal. Those 2 changes, applied consistently, are where the transformation begins. Take good care of yourself and those you love. Your health is built from the small choices you make every single day. Start with one today. I will see you in the next video.